Brendan Dassey trial transcript day 8, continuing on page 97. If I don't recall. I'm going to ask you to refer to your answer sheet, and I'm going to ask a couple of specific questions and ask how Brendan answered them. I'll first ask you, question number 265. Brendan was asked, as read, I think nearly anyone would tell a lie to keep out of trouble. 265. Tell the jury how Brendan answered that question, please. Well, again, saying that, it's going to be misleading, and it says true. He said true. Anyone would lie to keep out of trouble. Question number 391. Brendan was asked this question. When I am concerned, I tell that portion of the truth which is not likely to hurt me. Tell us what Brendan's answer was to 391, please. Well, as I said on direct, this is a misuse of the test, but he said, Doctor, he said true. Is there a problem? You don't understand my question, or you, well, then I can't answer it when it mischaracterizes my testimony. You can't answer true or false to what his answer was? Not when it's in a misleading, oh, I see, all right. I'm sorry. Well, let's talk about misleading the jury then. The MMPI could be scored for something called antisocial personality traits. In other words, to determine whether or not somebody lacks guilt about criminal exploits that they're involved in. That's true, isn't it? There are several such scales. Did you score for any of those? Yes. Now, antisocial or, well, oh, I'm sorry, because he's under 18. Did you want to say something about that or not? No, you're right. You can't make a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder for an individual under the age of 18. But there is no scale specifically listed as antisocial traits or whatever you referred to. There are similar statements, but not that one. All right, suffice it to say, Dr. Gordon, that scale and those results were not included in your official written report to the court? Which scale? Any scale that dealt with Mr. Dassey's personality characteristics, takes that might show a conduct disorder or antisocial personality disorder. It was not included, isn't that right? Because it wasn't so indicated, yes. You interviewed Brendan, you said, on the 3rd and 10th of November? Yes. Now, during your interview with Brendan, you described him as being sad, polite, and passive. That's correct, isn't it? Yes. Within your report to the court, you noted that Brendan was nervous getting up in front of people. Is that right? That's what he told me. Do you feel that was significant to the ultimate conclusion that you rendered in this case as to vulnerability to suggestibility? It's a factor that's related to it, yes. Oh, a lot of people get nervous standing up in front of crowds or in front of people. Social phobia is the number one fear there is. All right, and death is number 2, isn't that right? I'm just told the number 1, which people are more nervous about getting up in front of a crowd than they are about dying. That's the point? That's your point. I don't know that that's number 2. All right. They might be socially phobic and standing up and talking about death, for all I know. Brendan also said that he was nervous when meeting new people. Isn't that right? That's right. Lots of people get nervous meeting new people. Is that right? Some people do. During your interview, you also mentioned, however, that Brendan exhibited no symptoms of depression, no appetite problems, or any of those kinds of issues. Is that fair? That's what he told me, and the only thing that was indicative of sadness was the look on his face and the poor eye contact. I'm sorry, and the poor eye contact. All right, now, contrary to what you saw, in other words, your observations of Brendan, the MMPI suggests that Brendan has the type of personality that he might exhibit many of such or of those kinds of complaints. Is that what the MMPI report says? I'm sorry? Isn't that what the MMPI report says? Do you want me to read from what? No. What I want you to do is, does the MMPI conclusion contradict, or is it different than what you personally observed of Brendan? It doesn't contradict. Is it different then? No, he didn't exhibit, he denied feeling depressed, and he denied having physical vegetative signs of depression like sleep, appetite, headaches, stomach. He's denied that. But it does say he seems generally unhappy and pessimistic about life. My observation of him was consistent with that. Were there any instances, whether it's in your report or not, doctor, where the test results that you obtained from any of these instruments were in contrast to what you personally observed with Brendan? I'm sorry, counsel, I'll ask that again. My mind went off in, were there any circumstances where the test results that you obtained or the test result conclusions were in contrast or were different to what you personally observed from Brendan? On the MMPI? On anything, any of the test results. I'm just wondering if that phenomenon ever occurred. The only one is as I said before, he was elevated on a scale of hypochondriasis and also on other subscales measuring semantic complaints. And he didn't report that to me. All right, when that happens, when the test results differ from what you see with your own eyes, how do you reconcile that? Which of the two do you adopt, if you will? Research has shown that testing, actuarial testing, as well as objective testing, there's usually better reliability and validity of that than a person's conducting an interview. All right, Dr. Gordon, when you interviewed Brendan, you said that he appeared polite and was responsive to all of your questions. Is that right? He answered all of my questions. There's a slow reaction time. He was polite, yes. He appeared to appear hostile at all to you? No, sir. Have you ever had an interview in your many years of being either a clinical or forensic psychologist where the subject that you were interviewing had a dislike for either you personally or members of your profession? I'm sorry, yes, I have. All right. It's not funny, but it definitely has happened. Tell us about when that happens, because I'm sure lawyers have that as well. What do you observe when an individual has either a personal dislike or that of your profession? Well, they usually don't dislike only my profession. They dislike judges, attorneys, guards, and they feel like they're the victim of a system. And they can have histories of being aggressive, and they can specialize in swearing and being vulgar. And I never needed to push the alarm button yet, but I don't push things too hard when I'm trying to get information because I value my personal safety. Let's at least start or confine ourselves to the lower end of that scale, that at least they're not physically assaultive towards you. It's fair that it's more difficult to obtain information from them. They aren't as free to provide you with answers or with information than you otherwise might like. Isn't that true? If a person is guarded or hostile, it's much more difficult to obtain information. They're certainly not predisposed to cooperate with you, right? No, sir. Well, wouldn't the same be expected if somebody had a dislike generally for police officers? Wouldn't you expect them to be more guarded and less free to provide inculpatory information? In general, that would be true. If you're only considering that and not other factors. Let's assume for the sake of argument that this young man, Brendan Dassey, had a predisposition or a dislike of law enforcement or police officers generally, wouldn't you expect Brendan to be less forthcoming instead of more forthcoming with information in the course of an interview? If I only considered that factor alone, then that's probably true. You talked about the concept of suggestibility, and I want this jury to understand my first series of objections earlier in your direct examination. You talked about something about false confessions, and then you talked about suggestibility. Do you agree that those are two separate concepts? Isn't that right? Yes. In fact, somebody who is suggestible, that is, somebody who is vulnerable to suggestibility, is just as likely to provide a true confession as they would be to provide a false confession. Isn't that true? I don't know if just as likely, but I can tell you that individuals who are suggestible, certainly increasingly suggestible, certainly have a greater chance of providing a confession, period. And it could either be true or false. All right, so this jury understands you're not commenting on the truthfulness or reliability or believability of an admission or a confession that might be provided by a suggestible person, just that they may be more vulnerable to suggestibility. I'm not commenting on truthfulness and falseness, but I am here to talk about reliability and suggestibility. That I can comment on. That is different than being truthful. Reliable is different than being truthful or false. I can't tell this judge or this jury or anyone in here whether that's not my job. I'm not here to do that. Dr. Gordon, do you remember the last time we had a chance to speak, me asking you the specific question that Brendan was just as likely to provide a true confession as a false confession? Remember me asking you that? Yes. Remember, what your answer was then? No, but you can tell me. I'm asking you if you remember. No, I don't. Your answer today, if I could ask you that specific question again, is what? Isn't Brendan just as likely to provide a true confession as a false confession? I don't know. Just it is possible that if he provides a confession, it could either be true or false. That is what I would say. Now, the concept of suggestibility is not a discipline or an area that is just unique to police interrogations. It's something that we see every day with marketing or advertising or fields like that. Isn't that true? That's true, but there are the research regarding suggestibility in criminal matters cannot always be applicable to other kinds of suggestibility. For example, suggestibility scales for hypnotism and likelihood to be hypnotized are not correlated at all. I'm not asking what hypnotic suggestibility, my question is whether somebody is suggestible, and this kind of goes to the true or false confession. The suggestibility doesn't remove somebody's ability to reason. In other words, to choose one answer or another, that's true, isn't it? Suggestibility, if they're more suggestible, it reduces the likelihood of that. I'm sorry? What's your question again, please? Maybe suggestibility doesn't remove somebody's decision-making ability. They still get to choose whether they're going to adopt that suggestion or not. Isn't that right? They still get to choose, but their choosing can be affected by their psychological characteristics and the way they're being interrogated. I'm not talking about interrogation. As an example, if somebody tells you to buy a Chevy over a Ford, they may be suggesting that you buy a Chevy, but you still get to make that decision. In that case, that's true. If somebody tells you you should order pizza, you get to decide if you're going to order a pizza. Is that right? That's true. If my wife says order a pizza and I don't want it, there might be a little bit of persuasion for me to get the pizza. You see? I appreciate that there's those other factors. By the way, the area of suggestibility is not a recognized specialty or even a subspecialty in the area of psychology, whether forensic or otherwise. Isn't that true? A subspecial, fitness, that's true. Fitness to stand trial, NGI, those are not subspecialties. Forensic psychology is a subspecialty. I asked about suggestibility. Doesn't fall under those categories of specialty or subspecialty? No. Now, you told this jury that you reviewed the videotaped interview of Brendan on the 1st and some written narrative or a transcript, I suppose, of an interview on the 27th of February. Is that right? True. And that sometime later you got some school records to review in case you were asked about that here at trial? Or let me ask it a different way, to consider and determine whether or not it might affect your opinion of Brendan? That's true. By the way, how did watching that interview, and this jury got to see that interview, they got to see about just under 3 hours of what you've called the 4-hour interview, but how did watching the first 3 hours of that interview impact or affect your report? You understand my question? Or would you like me to be more specific? I could try to answer, but if you could be more specific, that might be helpful. Whether you watched that interview or not, would you have been able to render these same conclusions? That is, that Brendan was vulnerable to suggestibility, or did you need to watch that March 1 interrogation to come to that conclusion? It wasn't absolutely necessary, but it was helpful. You're telling the jury that it wasn't absolutely necessary to watch the interrogation that you were being asked to render an opinion about? To render an opinion about it? No. Attorney Freeman, that wasn't the answer, Judge. It was, I believe the answer was not necessary, absolutely necessary, but helpful. So if the court, that's a correct statement. I'm sorry. That's a correct statement of the answer. Why don't you just recast the question? Attorney Kratz, sure. You're telling this jury that it wasn't absolutely necessary to watch that interview to render this opinion about Brendan's suggestibility? Attorney Freeman, Judge, again, that's not I believe the answer was it's not absolutely necessary, but helpful, if he wants to rephrase it that way. The court, the question was fairly asked. Go ahead, you may answer. The witness, could you read back the question, please? I can ask it again if you'd rather. Are you telling this jury that it wasn't absolutely necessary to watch the March 1 interview in order to render this opinion about Brendan's suggestibility? Not absolutely necessary, no, it was helpful. Let's talk about what might have been helpful or omitted from your report. The report that you've rendered that talks about Brendan's suggestibility is devoid of any examples where Brendan actually resisted attempts by officers to suggest answers. Isn't that true?